Okay, you want to get up to speed quickly on the important stuff, right? Without getting totally bogged down in details. We hear you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dive straight in. Today, we're focusing on something really central to fighting financial crime: risk assessment.
Exactly. And it's really more than just ticking a box for the regulators.
Yeah.
How these financial institutions actually measure up potential threats. It's absolutely key for protecting the whole financial system,
Yeah.
protecting all of us from the fallout of illegal money.
Right. And we're drawing on materials from FinCrime intelligence for this, yeah,
Yeah.
to help us unpack it.
That's the plan. Really get into how this all works.
So our mission today:
Yeah.
pull out the main ideas of financial crime risk assessment, maybe find some surprising bits, and give you some, genuinely useful takeaways.
Sounds good.
Okay, first things first. When we say risk assessment in this area,
Mhm.
what exactly are we talking about? What's the core idea?
At its heart, it's really a structured way for these organizations, banks and the like, to spot and evaluate the dangers they face systematically. Weighing things up, measuring potential risks.
So definitely more than just a gut feeling. It's a proper process.
Oh, absolutely. It's deliberate. You pinpoint potential risks, then you analyze them.
Analyze them how?
Huh. Well, you look at how likely they are to actually happen, and importantly, what the damage could be if they do happen.
Right, likelihood and impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that analysis, it then lets the institutions make smarter choices
Choices
about how to manage those risks best, how to make sure they're following the rules, regulations, even where to put their efforts, their resources.
Okay.
Ultimately, it's just fundamental for keeping things stable and trustworthy in finance.
Got it. So risk assessment isn't just like a side task. It sounds like it's the absolute foundation for fighting financial crime effectively.
It really is. It's the bedrock.
Yeah.
Everything else, it's built on top of that understanding.
Mhm.
If you don't clearly see where your weak spots are, maybe it's with certain customers or specific products or even the countries you deal with, then anything you try to do to stop money laundering or, funding terrorism or fraud, it's just not going to be very effective, is it?
Makes total sense. You can't really defend against a threat you haven't properly identified or understood.
Mm-hmm.
So how does doing this assessment practically help them?
Well, it lets them really zero in on those vulnerable spots
You okay?
and understand why they're vulnerable, what are the factors involved,
Right.
and then that allows for a much more sort of targeted response. You can put your resources, your controls, the preventative measures where they're actually needed most, where they'll make a difference.
Okay, that's logical, targeted effort.
Right.
So what kinds of risks are we talking about? Sounds like it could be a pretty wide range.
It is, yeah. A good assessment looks at several areas, and they're often linked. First up, there's customer risk.
Customer risk. So who you're dealing with.
Exactly. It's about who your client is. Is it an individual, a company?
Mm-hmm.
You look at their source of where did the money actually come from? What's their job, their occupation? And a really big one is political exposure. Are they what's called a PEP, a politically exposed person?
Ah, yes, PEPs. That always seems like a tricky area. Why is that specific factor so important?
Well, the thinking is that people in powerful political roles or those close to them might potentially pose a higher risk
High risk of what?
of being involved in things like bribery or corruption. Now, it doesn't automatically mean they are involved, not at all.
Right.
But it does mean the institution needs to take a closer look, do more digging, just to understand any potential risks there.
Okay, that clarifies it. It's about potential needing more scrutiny.
Got it.
What's the next risk category?
Then you've got product and service risk. Some financial products or services just naturally carry more risk than others.
Okay, like what? Can you give some examples?
Sure. FinCrime intelligence points to things like trade finance, which can be quite complex. Also, private banking, often dealing with high net worth individuals and potentially complex wealth structures.
Right.
And increasingly, crypto services.
Ah, crypto. Why is that seen as higher risk?
Often it's down to the complexity or sometimes the level of anonymity that might be possible with certain crypto transactions.
Okay.
Makes tracing funds harder sometimes. Trade finance, too. The complexity of international trade can unfortunately be misused. And what's interesting is how fast this space, especially crypto, is moving.
Yeah, constant change.
Exactly, which means risk assessments have to keep evolving, too.
Right, complexity and anonymity. Sounds like built-in challenges for managing risk. What about where the business happens? Geography?
Yep, that's geographical risk. Where the institution operates or where its customers are located, that can really shift the risk profile.
How so?
Well, think about regions known for higher levels of corruption, or countries under international sanctions,
Right.
or maybe places where the rules, the regulatory oversight are just known to be a bit weaker.
Right.
Doing business in those places or having a lot of clients there naturally bumps up the risk exposure.
So a bank heavily involved in a country with, say, weak anti-money laundering laws faces inherently higher geographical risk.
Precisely. And it might not even be whole countries. Sometimes specific regions within them carry different risk levels.
Okay. Next, we have delivery channel risk. How does how people bank matter?
This is all about the method of interaction. How do customers connect with the bank or service?
Like online versus in person?
Exactly. Think about remote interactions, non-face-to-face stuff. Online account opening is a big one.
Convenient, though.
Very convenient, yes. But these channels can also carry a higher risk of fraud and impersonation. It's just harder to be absolutely sure who you're dealing with when they're not right there in front of you.
That's a huge point today with so much done digitally.
Okay.
Okay, and the last category you mentioned,
That would be transactional risk. This looks at the actual transactions themselves.
the money movement.
Yeah. Are they unusual for that specific customer, maybe in size or how often they happen? Are they structured in a really complicated way? Or, crucially, do they seem to lack any obvious economic reason, any legitimate purpose?
Okay.
Those kinds of transactions can be red flags for illicit activity. You know, a sudden huge transfer in an account that normally only sees small sums with no clear explanation. That needs looking at.
So looking for things that just don't add up, anomalies. And you said
Yeah.
earlier these risks aren't separate silos.
Not at all. They definitely interact. They can compound each other.
Like how?
Imagine a high-risk customer, maybe a PP, using a complex product like private banking, located in a high-risk country, and they're doing it all online.
Oh, yeah.
That combination, that creates a much higher overall risk profile. It demands serious attention.
Okay, so we've got this picture. Looking at customers, products, locations, channels, transactions, getting a full view of the potential weak spots. How does an institution actually do this assessment? What are the steps involved?
It usually kicks off with data collection, gathering all the relevant info.
What kind of info?
Data on their clients, the products they use, transaction histories, the geographical areas they're exposed to, basically getting all the puzzle pieces together.
Okay, gathering the raw material. Then what?
Once they have the data, it's risk identification. This is where they actively look for those potential risk sources.
How do they find them?
They'll use things like internal reports, maybe past incidents. They'll look at known financial crime typologies. Those are like the common patterns or methods criminals use.
Okay.
And they pay close attention to guidance from regulators, too. What are the authorities warning about?
So spotting potential trouble based on experience and official guidance makes sense. After identifying risks.
Then comes risk analysis. This is key. They evaluate each risk they've identified.
Evaluate how.
Two things. How likely is it to actually happen? The probability. And second, if it does happen, how bad would it be? The potential impact.
Likelihood and impact again.
Exactly. It's not enough to just list risks. You have to understand how probable and how severe they might be.
Right, you need to gauge the actual threat level.
Yeah. Precisely. And that analysis feeds directly into risk scoring.
Scoring, like
Yeah.
giving it a grade.
Sort of, yeah. Based on that likelihood and impact, they'll assign a risk rating. Often something simple, like low, medium, or high.
Okay.
And that score is really important because it dictates the level of controls needed.
Ah, so high risk gets tougher controls.
Exactly. You wouldn't apply the most intense scrutiny to every single customer or transaction. That would be inefficient and annoying for everyone. It has to be risk-based,
Yeah.
proportional.
That proportionality point feels really crucial. What's the final step?
Documentation and review. Keeping detailed records is vital. What did the assessment find? What decisions were made based on it?
So creating a paper trail.
Yes, but it's not just filed away. Risk isn't static. Threats change, criminal methods evolve, regulations get updated.
Right.
So these assessments have to be reviewed regularly, updated, kept current. It needs to be a living process, adapting to the changing world.
A dynamic thing, not a one-off report. Okay. Now, you mentioned regulators guiding this. Bodies like the Financial Action Task Force, FATF,
Yes, the global standard setter.
and FinCEN in the U.S., the European Banking Authority, EBA. Why do these powerful groups care so much about risk assessments?
Well, because, as we said, it's the absolute foundation. It's step one for effective prevention. These regulators, these supervisors, they expect institutions not just to do an assessment, but to really understand their own specific risks.
Okay.
And then this is crucial to actually use that understanding to shape everything else, their policies, their day-to-day procedures, how they monitor transactions.
So it has to drive their actions. It's not just theoretical.
Absolutely not. It's a core expectation. And what happens if they don't do it well?
Yeah, what are the consequences?
FinCrime intelligence is pretty clear on this. Inadequate risk assessments, or ones that are just gathering dust and out of date, they are a very common reason for regulators to step in.
Step in how?
Criticism, certainly. But often, it leads to significant enforcement actions, fines, sanctions, restrictions, not to mention the damage to their reputation.
Ouch. Okay, so getting the risk assessment right isn't just good practice. It's essential for survival, for staying compliant.
Definitely.
So we've identified the risks, analyzed them, scored them. How does that translate into actual practical steps to stop financial crime?
Right. The assessment directly informs the controls. Those are the specific actions taken to lessen the risks.
Okay.
For instance, if the assessment flags a customer as high risk, the institution will likely apply enhanced due diligence, or EDD.
Which means
Basically, more checks, deeper scrutiny of who they are, their business, where their money comes from, ongoing monitoring of their activity, more than the standard level.
got it. More checks for high risk. Give us a couple more examples of controls driven by the assessment.
Sure, if a particular country is deemed high risk, maybe the bank puts geolocation restrictions on some online services accessed from there. To tackle transactional risk, they might set up specific transaction monitoring rules designed to catch the suspicious patterns identified in the assessment.
Right. Automated flag.
Yeah, and something really important, staff training. The training needs to reflect the actual risks the institution faces so employees know what red flags to look for in their specific roles.
So the assessment really becomes the roadmap for where to build defenses and focus efforts.
That's a good way to put it, a blueprint.
And as you keep stressing, it's not static.
No, absolutely not. Criminals change tactics, new products emerge, rules shift. The assessment has to keep pace. It's a continuous loop. Assess, adapt controls, monitor, reassess.
Okay, this sounds incredibly important, but what are the concrete wins? The tangible benefits for an institution that really nails its risk assessments?
Oh, there are quite a few clear advantages. Firstly, it allows for proactive threat management.
Meaning?
You spot potential issues before they blow up into actual crime incidents.
Hmm.
You're ahead of the curve, or trying to be.
Okay, being proactive.
Yeah.
What else?
Resource optimization. This is huge. Compliance is expensive. A good risk assessment means you focus your money, your people, your technology where the risks are greatest.
Instead of spreading efforts too thin everywhere?
Exactly. A targeted, efficient approach rather than a scattergun one.
Makes sense. Any other major benefits?
Definitely. It leads to much better audit and regulatory readiness.
So?
Having a solid, up-to-date risk assessment, it shows the regulators and auditors, look, we understand our risks, and here's what we're actively doing about them. It demonstrates awareness and preparedness.
Builds confidence with the overseers.
Precisely. And finally, it just leads to better decision-making overall within the compliance function. Decisions are based on data, on analysis, not just guesswork, more informed strategies.
So it really moves beyond just ticking a compliance box. It becomes a tool for smarter, more effective operations in this fight.
That's the key takeaway, I think. FinCrime intelligence frames it well. A thorough risk assessment isn't just an obligation, it's a core strategic tool.
Strategic tool, I like that.
Yeah. It shapes how institutions defend themselves. Doing it regularly, doing it rigorously, that's what allows them to be agile, effective, and compliant, especially in a world where the threats are always changing.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive really shows that risk assessment is anything but a dry, bureaucratic task. It's dynamic, it's foundational, it's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
It's all about understanding those weak points, using resources wisely, and ultimately, protecting the integrity of the whole financial system.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It really highlights that being proactive, smart about risk isn't just necessary today, it's a real competitive advantage too.
That's a really powerful way to look at it. And, listening to this, it makes you think. These basic ideas, identifying risks, analyzing them, figuring out how to reduce them, they aren't just for big banks, are they?
How do you mean?
Well, think about your own life, maybe your digital security online, or even just managing personal finances. How do you spot potential problems and decide what precautions to take? It feels like this risk-based thinking has relevance way beyond finance.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, applying a structured way of thinking about risk. it probably is useful in many different areas.
Hmm. Something to think about anyway. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into financial crime risk assessment. We really hope it's given you a clearer picture of this absolutely vital process.